This is the new SIRUI 40mm f1.8 1.33x anamorphic lens, and yeah, it has autofocus. There's a ton of different anamorphic options out there these days, thankfully, and a lot of them are relatively inexpensive. But I think the thing that makes this the most interesting is the fact that I can actually film myself, and as a one-man band kind of thing, it just takes one thing out of the equation. It makes something like doing weddings a lot more easy. I definitely probably wouldn't use this only at weddings. Obviously, if they expand this thing into a lot more lenses, that could be a lot more feasible. But as it is, it does a pretty good job. I wouldn't say it is exactly on par with the rest of the, like Sony GM lenses I have out there. And every once in a while you get this weird little kind of sound coming out of there. I did talk to the people that obviously sent me the lens here, and they did say that that seemed to be normal. So maybe after I publish this video, they'll write me back and say, oh, actually it's not normal. But I have gotten firmware updates, and it has made the focus a lot better. So yeah. Now, one of the things that you're gonna see, and maybe you can see it here, is that we aren't exactly getting fully circular or fully oval bokeh. We're getting this kind of like weird hexagonal, whatever, a hexagon type of a pattern. And it's definitely odd. It's definitely not something I would be expecting out of something like this. But I don't think it ruins it for me. It just makes it more interesting, I guess. But obviously I would rather have it be a regular full oval shape if I had any control over it. Now, this lens is also a Super 35 lens is what they're saying, but this is on full frame with the FX3. So you can watch this bokeh right here as it moves through the screen. You can see the stuff like this kind of rounding out and getting some distortion. But personally, I think that stuff is pretty cool and adds to the character of it all. And then obviously, if you look up, kind of here in the corners, we actually aren't seeing very much vignetting at all. So, and this is at the minimum focus distance. So as close as you get, it all looks pretty good. And honestly, like that amount of distortion isn't that bad. It kind of actually looks cool. And then as we zoom out, we actually zoom in terms of focus breathing, so you can see that working. And so this is max focus, and then you are still seeing that you're not seeing vignetting. So yeah, it's looking pretty good. Now, one of the things that is interesting here is obviously, as I'm looking at this, I am currently squeezed, not de-squeezed. The FX3 does have the ability to de-squeeze the image, but one of the things I don't think they just had thought about or whatever is the fact that you lose autofocus when you do that. So this lens just becomes like any other anamorphic lens. One of the things I've done is either used a monitor, I've used a phone app, and those things make it so that I can absolutely just like monitor myself here. I'm doing it off of the side screen here just because it's a smaller, easier setup when I'm just in my backyard like this. But yeah, if you are doing this, one thing to note is even if you are using it on the FX3, you're not going to be able to use that little side monitor and de-squeeze it if you want to be using autofocus. So hopefully it's something that Sony will update. I'm not sure if they will, to be honest, because they obviously don't make their own autofocus anamorphics. But as there are more coming out from other manufacturers and stuff, maybe it's something that they will update. Now, I just picked a different spot so you can see a little bit more of the bokeh and stuff here and see how the edges are kind of starting to move in. I am literally the exact distance of my camera, so I'm touching the front of the lens here in case you're curious about what this ends up being. I find that 40mm actually works pretty well. It's obviously a little bit too far. I wouldn't want to necessarily, I could technically vlog with this, which would be pretty wild, but I would be this far away from it, which at the max, with me fully extending my arms, wouldn't exactly be ideal. And even this talking head is a little bit closer than I like to be to the camera. But you can see all this stuff and how well it does. And you can also see how well the autofocus works, which I feel like is definitely usable. And I think the thing is that I've used it on some of my talking head videos in my office, and when it's really, really static and something like this, the autofocus works really, really well. I find that if I want to move between points of like really close focus and then really far focus and do like a focus rack thing with the autofocus, that's when I started to run into some issues. So it makes that part a little bit more difficult. But if you're going to be doing focus racking, things like that anyway, you could just use the manual focus and it'd be kind of what you would anticipate doing. But I do find it struggles when you are just like completely changing between like the closest focus to something further away, which a lot of lenses struggle with, but I did find that that was an issue here. Now, just to continue kind of just moving this around so we can see what this looks like and how it's rendering the backgrounds. I found the flare to be pretty interesting. It wasn't something that was like overbearing. I know I have the APS-C 50mm f1.8 that I like the bokeh and things more because it's a little bit more standard. But the flaring, there would just be these big blue streaks, and not even like the thin, cool blue streaks, but just like ghosting streaks that came across the image and made it almost unusable for a lot of things. I had to buy like a full matte box and put it on there. But this, I feel like it's pretty good. And I'm also using the Nisi True Color NDs, solid NDs, so that I can get like the most natural look out of these. I feel like there's not a lot of color shift or anything like that that's coming out of this in comparison to other lenses. And that is something that I found that the original Super 35 50 1.8 that I have from SIRUI also does struggle with it. It's super warm, and so using it in combination with other lenses, you just have to shift colors quite a bit. And with this, I feel like it's a lot more neutral. So as far as focus breathing goes, obviously you can see that it's definitely moving in to out, and it's doing it kind of in an opposite way that a lot of my other lenses go. But overall, it's not horrendous. If you have like a static shot, it's something that you can fix just like with warp stabilizer. It's not really that big a deal. And to be fair, like I don't really know any anamorphic lenses that don't really have focus breathing. It's kind of just part of the trade-off there. So I picked this spot because you can see a little bit more of kind of like what the distortion does around here. So you can see some of the focus fall off, and I can't remember right now what it's called, but the distortion basically where like the point of focus is here and then things, it kind of just like curves, it's field curvature. There you go. Field curvature of this lens obviously is part of the distortion of the lens. It's something that I don't really hear a lot of people talk about, but it definitely has a decent amount of field curvature where I can kind of move and I won't be in the same plane of focus in terms of if it was a straight line, but I can move and things that should be further out of focus come more into focus as the sides kind of narrow there. So kind of an interesting thing about this lens and just part of the distortion character of it overall. But as my friend Cam Mackey always talks about, it's not like I'm looking for perfection out of something like this. I just want something that's interesting and usable. Otherwise, I would not be using an anamorphic lens. Ultimately, I think this thing is really, really interesting. And especially, again, for someone like myself that is more like run and gun, I never have other people filming with me. If you were using it on like a Lumix camera, like the S5 II, the S5 IIX, the S9, stuff like that, that's where I think some of the further squeeze factor ones that give you even more of that anamorphic look and a lot more of that bokeh, being way taller and more tear-shaped in that way, make a lot more sense. But I think 40 millimeters is a great focal length. It is really versatile. I can see myself using this for a lot of like extra wedding stuff. I could use it for photo work if I wanted to. And I could see myself taking this exact combo with just like the small overhead mic, the FX3 and the lens, and being able to make kind of like little hybrid photo video stuff and making it pretty interesting, because you do get a lot of those anamorphic characteristics. You get some of this weird distortion. You get flares that I think do look really good in comparison to some of the other stuff I've used in the past. So is it perfect? No. Is it good for the money? Yes. And do I hope they expand the lineup to have a lot more options? Absolutely. I think this would be a really, really good thing for the system. And again, these are marketed as Super 35 lenses, but on full frame, which is what I've shot all of these on, it looks really good. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. You can watch my original video on the 50 1.8 that I did on the FX3 up there. Watch some more videos of mine up here, and I will see you in the next one.